Thanks, you all. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all to Effective Altruism Sydney's social event for animals and how can we best help animals. I'll introduce our fantastic convener and moderator of the discussion tonight in a moment, but I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. Barangaroo is named for a proud Camaragal woman who is also of the Eora Nation, but we are standing on Gadigal land right now, and so I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners, the elders, custodians of the land, past and present. Moving on from that, Michael Dello-Iacovo is a bit of a wild card. He's not a rocket scientist, because that would be too easy. So he's a space scientist, currently a doctoral candidate at Uni New South Wales. He's a prolific animal activist. He's an effective altruism advocate. He started the existing, co-founded the existing chapter in Adelaide. He previously was the chief executive of Effective Altruism Australia briefly. And currently he's focusing his advocacy efforts, of which there are many, on working with the Animal Justice Party in Australia. He's a member of their state committee, and he will shortly be running for, I think, their seat of, I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget it. It starts with an H. Heffron. In 2019, he's running for the seat there. He's also a what you might call lifestyle giver, like many in the Effective Altruism movement, and has committed where many would say, oh, I'll give 1% of my income, I'll give 10% of my income, to 2016, $45,000. Anything CPI index beyond that he earns, he plans to give away to charity. So I think that's a very very noble way to set that cap rather than sort of giving what we can, 10% that a lot of people would subscribe to. So without further ado, a fantastic speaker tonight and convener of this panel, Michael Dello-Iacovo.
Thanks, James, for that inspiring introduction. All right, so thank you everyone for coming. Welcome. I hope you're excited, because I'm very excited for tonight. I hope we'll all get to learn something, including myself and the other speakers. So what I thought I'd do is I'll just give a quick introduction to what effective altruism is and how that applies to animal advocacy, and then we'll get into our speakers. So I think effective altruism is just this question of how can I improve the world as effectively as possible. We all have limited time and resources. And there are so many issues in the world, but with our limited time and resources, how can we do as much as we possibly can? So there's a couple of kind of areas I want to cover quickly. So first, we have this huge opportunity to do so much good if we just can only combine science and rationality with charity and empathy. But it's not just about the working out how to do the most good. It's about taking action and actually going and do it once we've done the research. It's about a movement of people, because it's not just the people in this room. This movement is a global movement. It was founded in about 2009 and is now in many countries around the world, of people who are wanting to have as much impact as they can. And also the organisations. So there are organisations, charities, non-profits that have done a lot of the research into finding some of the most effective charities in the world, research into different careers that one could take to be effective at improving the world, the whole range of different organisations who have done all the research for us. I want to focus a little bit on the taking action part. So career is an area that often people think about when they want to think about how they can improve the world. So some people go into non-profit, but one area that people don't necessarily consider so often is going into a for-profit role and focusing on earning a high salary so that they can donate some of this money to effective charities. So I've mentioned donating. Activism. If you do any activism, thinking about how can you do it as effective as possible, what can you do to improve the effectiveness of what you do. It's about research. And it's about growing the movement, because as I said, it's not just us, it's a movement of people, and we're more effective if we grow this movement and we have more people that we can draw on. I want to talk a little bit about cause prioritization. So there's a number of causes, and I guess by cause I mean a problem area or something wrong with the world that we want to fix. A lot of causes, a lot of problems, and as I said, we have to prioritize a little bit on what we focus on. So there's kind of three pillars that the effective altruism community tends to use to do so. Three areas to think about. So one is the scale of the problem, so just a measure of how big the problem is, or how good would it be if that problem went away entirely. The neglectedness, so this is how many people are working on the problem already, Because if a lot of people are working on a problem and it's not very neglected for time, for funding, then your chances of making a difference in that area are relatively smaller. And so it's important that it's not the entire picture, but think about how neglected certain causes are and where we can have a bigger impact personally. And then also the solvability, so just how easy is it to do something about this problem. Some problems are massive in scale, they're very neglected, but they're just hard to actually do anything about. And so we do need to think about that when we're thinking about how we're trying to improve the world. Within the non-human space, I want to talk a little bit about prioritization there specifically. So this is some data collected by animal charity evaluators from the US. So on the left is the number of animals used and killed in different areas. The vast majority of animals are used and killed in farms in the US, with a smaller percentage being used and killed in labs, smaller percentage for clothes, and also relatively few animals end up in shelters. What we see when we look at the funding going towards animal charities, most of the funding is going towards animal charities that focus on animals in shelters, with very little going towards improving the lives of animals in farms or reducing the number of animals that are farmed. And so I'd argue that within non-human space, specifically farmed animal charities are relatively neglected, just as an example of how to apply that methodology. So I want to talk a little bit about, I want to show you a video. I'm going to warn you that this video is a little bit graphic, there's no audio, but if you don't want to see this, it is of an animal farming operation. It's a bit graphic. If you don't want to see it, please just avert your eyes for the next 30 seconds. But I think it is important to talk about this because it helps us get a picture of what it is we're actually trying to solve, what it is we're trying to end and reduce. And I think actually showing this de-biases us because what happens in animal farms is just so hidden in our society. The only way to make rational choices about how do we prioritize this versus other issues is to actually understand what it is. So please, if you would like to, avert your eyes for the next 30 seconds. And I'm just going to narrate this a little bit. So this is an abattoir, chicken abattoir in Australia. This is relatively standard. So the chickens first go through an electric stunning bath, which is designed to render them unconscious. What happens though is if the chicken raises their head, which happens to a lot of the chickens, as you can see, they don't actually get stunned. And so when they go past the spinning blade, which cuts their neck, they're often still very much conscious and feeling. And then finally they go into a scalding water, which is to remove their feathers. But again, a lot of the chickens are still very much conscious when that happens. And so they're literally being drowned and burnt to death. This is what we're trying to, this is just one example, I guess, but this is what we're trying to solve. The same chickens that are in free-range farms, organic farms, and none, they all end up in the same slaughterhouses, typically. So, yeah, that's kind of all I wanted to show there, just to get a picture. Why is it important to be effective for animals? A lot of people will say that it's enough to just do anything for animals. Why do we have to think about effectiveness? But I think it's important because effectiveness can literally mean the difference between sparing one animal from suffering and 10, or even more, for the same input and effort. And so I think they deserve our full attention to detail. All right, so on to our panel. I just want to cover a few quick things before I introduce our speakers. So first, there are two types of disagreements, I think, and I think this is important to recognize. First is there are disagreements on facts and there are disagreements on values. And I cover this because in a perfect world where everyone has access to all the same information, in theory there should be relatively few disagreements in facts, but disagreements in values are harder to kind of align. And I say this because a lot of people, when they disagree, so keep this in mind whether you're one of the speakers talking to another speaker or whether you're in the audience, a lot of people, when they disagree, they assume it's about the facts, but I think more often than not, people are actually disagreeing on values. And so I think that's just important to consider. So be honest with yourself if you disagree on anything, whether you're disagreeing on the facts or whether you're disagreeing on some values. I want this to be an opportunity for all of us, myself included, to learn rather than, I still would welcome debate, but I think the goal here should be for everyone to learn something and to become, to be open-minded and to learn something, to become more effective advocates, more effective activists. Okay, and finally, we're going to use poll everywhere tonight for the questions. So I'll have an opportunity at the end if anyone doesn't have a smartphone to ask a question the old-fashioned way, but if you have a phone, you can go to this link and you can submit a question, which then I'll see and then pass on to our panelists. You can upvote questions that you find interesting or that you would like to hear. Okay, so yep, I'll now introduce our panelists. I'll get them to come up as I read out their names, but if we could just hold our applause until I've read all of their bios. So first is Emma Hurst. Emma Hurst is a registered psychologist, the National Campaign Manager at the Animal Justice Party, and the Senate candidate for the upcoming New South Wales state election in 2019. Emma's worked tirelessly for the rights of animals for over 11 years, with a background in campaigning, political lobbying, and media work. She has been vegan for 19 years. Thank you, Emma. Alex Vince is a dedicated abolitionist who has worked on issues ranging from the state-sanctioned slaughter of introduced wildlife to the cruelties inherent in animal agribusiness. He's based in Sydney and currently works at Animal Liberation New South Wales. And Kai Macbeth is a full-time animal activist based in Sydney. He is part of the team behind Anonymous for the Voiceless. Anonymous for the Voiceless is the world's largest chapter. He is the director of the University Cupcake Challenge, an organisation running vegan outreach initiatives in universities across New South Wales. He's also the co-founder and organiser of Truth Walkers, an emerging public outreach and disruption organisation based in Sydney and London. Kai was introduced to the Effective Altruism movement in late 2016 and has since been committed to creating a bridge to share values between EA and grassroots activism. Can we please welcome our excellent speakers tonight? If there are any questions that come in, whilst we're waiting for that, I'm going to get each of the speakers to give a quick 3-minute overview of what it is that they do and their organisation does. It can be as brief or as detailed as you like, so we'll go through itself, Kai.
Yeah, right. So, as Michael said, I've sort of my foot in 3 current organisations. I help out with a couple of other direct action groups in Sydney, like VGPX and things of that matter. I mainly started my organisational role last year in Anonymous for the Voiceless Sydney. As Michael said, it's one of 800 AV chapters around the world. It's also the largest and probably highest, not probably, is the highest impact chapter in the world as well. My main roles around that is organising events and social media promotion, organising volunteers as well. I also am the director of the University Cupcake Challenge, which is a vegan outreach organisation similar to the format of AV. Essentially, we go into universities around Sydney and offer students baked vegan goods in exchange for sitting down and watching slaughter footage essentially and then discussing it with them. And then finally, I am also the director and founder of Truth Walkers, which is an organisation that focuses more on the public disruption and direct action aspect of it, taking sort of core values that underpin Anonymous for the Voices, similar sort of structured aesthetic, and to taking our TVs and our footage mobile and bringing it directly to the public.
Great, thanks, Kai. Alex?
Hi, so my name is Alex. I'm the Farmed Animal Campaign Coordinator with Animal Liberation. What that means basically is I focus primarily, almost exclusively on farmed animals. So what we look at in particular is where there is the most suffering and what we can do about it and how we can best achieve our goals. I also do a bit of work with Sydney Birdsave as a vigil organiser, which is quite new, so that's good. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I think I'm going to learn a lot from this.
Thank you. And Emma?
My name's Emma Hurst. I started my career in animal rights probably at about 6 or 7 years old when I rescued my first cat. And when I went to university, I studied psychology because I decided I wanted to really work in animal rights. And animal cruelty is not an animal issue, it's a human issue. And I believe that the solution is also human-based, so humans need to change their behaviour. So I did my master's in health psychology, and I focused around health promotion. So this sort of arm of psychology really looks at changing people's behaviour on a mass scale. So how do we encourage entire populations to switch their perception that smoking is cool to smoking is dirty, disgusting, and it's related to disease rather than being a popular thing that everyone should do in movies. So psychologists are hired to run some of these mass behaviour change campaigns, and I wanted to learn some of those techniques so I could pull them and then use them in the animal rights field. And I've been lucky enough to work in animal rights now for over a decade. My job now is exactly what I studied for. So my job, I work as a global campaigns mobilization manager, which is a fancy title essentially. I work with campaigners in Africa, India, China, Thailand, the UK, all around the world. And I help them when they're strategizing for their campaigns to work out what they need to know to be able to run a campaign to actually create behavior change, and to run the research to help us design the campaign strategy, and then to run research while the campaign's actually running to check that the campaign's working and that people are actually changing their behavior. And if the campaign's not working, what barriers, what motivations haven't we assessed properly, and reassessing it. So I'm lucky to be able to work in that really specifically. I am also the National Campaign Manager for the Animal Justice Party, which is the political party for the animals. We have one Member of Parliament here in New South Wales, and I am the lead candidate for the New South Wales state election, which will be in March next year. Fingers crossed we'll get in there as well.
Great, thank you, Emma. Got a few questions coming in, so please, if you have any more questions, send them through. So I'll ask first, when it comes to the suffering of farmed animals, do you think policy and regulation are potentially as effective a lever as direct consumer advocacy? And how do you evaluate that distinction? So does anyone want to take that? Or can I call on someone? Emma?
I read a paper about this actually this week, and I say this as a science and a data nerd. When we look at the research, when we look at that face-to-face advocacy, that one-on-one person outreach, essentially what the research is saying is we don't know how effective that is. Some of the research suggests that leafleting, for example, actually encourages people to eat more animals, and I think that that's an unconscious process. In fact, Woolworths said that to me as well. They said that when the Animals Australia started to run their Make It Possible ads, that the consumption of pork meat went up. Now that's just a correlation. I don't know if the two things were related. They thought that they were related. But the jury's out, essentially, on that one-on-one face activism. What they're finding is that and I guess this comes back to some of the principles that Michael was talking about. And this is one of the reasons why I'm running for the Animal Justice Party, is that I want to make sure that what I'm spending my time on is going to bring us the fastest change possible. And what the research is suggesting is that the fastest change possible lies with corporate change and government policy change. And they're the two areas where we can create the fastest movement, and that's where the research is saying, if we get a policy through, we can knock enormous amounts of change in one swoop. Whereas that one-to-one, and speaking as a psychologist as well, when we talk about behaviour change, a lot of people, a lot of animal rights activists, first of all, there's an assumption that if people only knew that they would change their behaviour, but anybody that's shown another person, a graphic documentary or information online, and they haven't changed their behaviour, we know that that's not true. Behaviour change is much more complicated and complex than just changing somebody's mind. So people can, ethically agree with us, but actually committing to a major change in your life, changing the way you eat every single day, changing the clothing that you wear, changing the brands that you buy. It's quite a complex and a big lifestyle change. And you'll see that some people will change and then they'll go back. And so there's actually a thing called a trans-theoretical model of change, where people go from pre-contemplation to contemplation to action stage. And people kind of move all around here all the time. So people might try veganism for 1 week and then they go back to eating animals. And they might go, and then they might try it again 2 years later with a bit more information. So that one-on-one behaviour change is so complex, and it's influenced by so many things. They're motivated by friends, by costs, by a variety of barriers. by health, by environment, by animal welfare. They try to push certain images down and try to sort of, like there's that bias of not wanting to recognize things. There's self-confirmation bias. We know that people are eating a lot more meat than they say that they're eating, for example. So that one-on-one behavior change is so complex and so difficult. And so I really think that policy and regulation change and massive corporate change will probably bring us much quicker to what we want to get to.
Does anyone else want to jump in on that?
I would agree with Emma. I think them working, most definitely, working in concert though would be, because you have to build a community around what we're doing, kind of reach a scale where we can make social change as well as kind of structural change. Yeah, I think working in concert with both, policy change and actual on the ground outreach is probably a great combination.
Yeah, cool. I think I probably agree with that view as well. It's definitely needs to be multifaceted approach, and I think a lot of the time with what at least I see from the rapidly emerging activist community, those people are looking to invest hours in something. Probably people who may not be attracted to policy change. So it's essentially, I completely agree with the sort of statement that it's one-to-one outreach is a bit of a pretty big question mark compared to how much we know about policy and governmental change. And that's sort of what I'm aiming to do with grassroots activism over the next couple of years, is particularly through Anonymous with the Voiceless and the Universal Cupcake Challenge. What we're looking to go through is a further push towards sort of transition to veganism programs, so things like Anonymous for Animal Rights is Challenge 22, which track quite well how many follow-ups they do after the month of the 22 days. From what they say, they have roughly, it's more review is needed, but from what they say after the months of review, they have about a 70% success rate with people going and staying vegan from there, and using sort of specific URLs that we can track directly from people who sign up from our outreach events. We can hopefully get a bit more of a tangible sense of how effective the one-to-one outreach is. Once again, it is a bit of a mystery. We can't hire private investigators to follow people and see if they eat milk solids in one time. Yeah.
So just to check, the 70%, is that from once they've clicked the link? Is that from when they've signed up for the challenge?
So I believe it's in the 1 to 2 months after the challenge. So
Yep. Cool. Yeah, Emma mentioned that's one study actually showed that people receiving leaflets, I think it was, ended up eating more meat according to the. That could be due to a number of things. That could be due to the sample size being small and just some random error. It could be maybe something that we're not capturing. But I think I would definitely, I'm a strong advocate for just more research in this space. There's been a lot of research into different interventions in the social and international development space, but for animal advocacy, there's just been so little, and I think it's really important that we spend a lot more time doing the groundwork now to work out what is effective before we scale anything up, would be my view. So one question that kind of follows on from a little bit, if anyone else has anything to add, is promoting, are you aware of any somewhat rigorous research about what's the most effective in persuading people to stop buying meat or animal products? So having said all of that, what maybe is your view of what's the most effective way to get that behavior change?
I'm sort of predicting this might turn into a bit of a abolitionism versus welfareism sort of thing. I can't particularly cite any research myself, but our organisations essentially attack things with a purely abolitionist message. It's not to say, I think there's, in animal rights, there's sort of this polar dichotomy between like a welfareist message and the abolitionist message. And the abolitionists view welfareists as this sort of filthy group who just want to facilitate further animal exploitation and sort of breed complacency in society. I don't think that's the case. I think both approaches work well. I think everyone at heart has a sort of abolitionist goal, but whether a welfareist policy or welfare-based message might be effective at achieving that goal is a different question. But at least from my experience on the ground and the probably 2,000 one-to-one conversations I've had over the past 2 years with people on the street, I usually find it fairly two-firm abolitionist approach to be most effective.
Just further to what Kai was saying, so I actually ran a project when I used to work for Animal Liberation with Alex, and when I was working there, we ran a project. We tested 19 variables on Facebook on the broiler meat industry, and we wanted to see what kind of Facebook ad would create the most behaviour change. And so we targeted two groups. We targeted young, educated, socially aware individuals, and we also targeted older middle-class Australians. And we tested a variety of different things. So we tested a cute image versus a sad image, and it didn't matter whether we used a cute image or a sad image for both target groups. And the other thing that we tested was whether we asked people to reduce the amount of chicken that they were eating or to eliminate the amount of chicken they were eating. And again, it made absolutely no difference what our ask was. So that kind of, and I think that there is this push that, you can't tell people to stop eating it because they'll reject that message. But we found that it absolutely made no difference in both of those target groups. I was just telling Kai just before we started this that the group that responded most to our ads, we thought that the young, socially aware, educated group would respond more positively to our ads. But it was actually the older middle-class Australians that were more likely to click through. They spent a lot more time reading through all the information on our website. They made a lot more comments on the ads that were positive or neutral, and a lot more sort of thoughtful comments about "I had no idea that this was going on" type sort of comments. So I think that when we talk about, it's very difficult. I don't think there's any kind of one rigorous research report that kind of says this is the strongest message, because I think that what we really need to know is who are we talking to, and that's what will change what is the most effective message. So the more effective message for that older middle class Australians was a message around health. But for younger sort of socially aware people, they performed also better. Well, actually, they responded really well to the health message as well, but they also responded really well to the animal welfare message or the animal rights message. So I guess it depends, who you're talking to would change what the strongest message is. And again, that would depend on, cultural background, age, gender, and a variety of other traits and personality and all sorts of things.
Yeah, so do you think that would give online ads a big edge over, say, like leafleting or direct outreach, because you can target it more effectively?
I think first of all, yes, I think you can target it more, specifically ads on social media, for example. And what I like about social media is you can assess. So you can assess how well those ads are performing, and whether people are taking your action, whether they're signing a petition or taking a pledge, or even just clicking through to a website, and then you've got your Google Analytics that will tell you how long they actually spent on that website, or whether they clicked through to other pages on your website to find out more information. So it's a little bit like spying on somebody, but spying on them for good, to sort of see so we did ads on environment as well. And they completely bombed for both groups, so they just failed. Whereas we thought with the younger socially aware people, the environmental message might really resonate with them, but it didn't. So you can sort of start to learn, okay, well, let's stop giving that information out. But it can also then, I don't think you can replace online with that face-to-face stuff that Kai's doing, and I'm sure that Kai's I think if somebody's good at speaking to somebody face-to-face and they're natural at it and they can kind of answer questions, that's not something you can replace with Facebook, because that's a solid sort of message, and it only moves when we move it to like that bigger sort of group. But it can help us frame the messages for some of that face-to-face action. So if we know that people are responding to a health message, then we can go, okay, well, let's slip that into some of our flyers, or let's bring people in with a health message, like have a health day, something about plant-based eating, and bring people in and then talk about all the other aspects of veganism, for example, if we think that's going to work better with university students.
Yeah, just to quickly add on that, not to sound too sort of airy and uncritical, but I think there is very much value in the idea that there needs to be so many multiple approaches, because this is sort of, I think, exposure principle that you'll find. If someone, at the end of the day, it's as much as we sort of look at it in a granular way and look one specific ad or one specific outreach conversation. At the end of the day, people are going to be hitting these things multiple times in probably a week or a month. And I think that's this sort of exposure principle, multimedia exposure principle that goes on. You know, they might talk to one of us on the street, and then the next day see one of your ads, and then it sort of gives this idea of that, you know, the social changes is happening. There's more burden to change, and I think that's overall going to be incredibly effective instead of just finding one really effective thing and cracking at it.
And it will change too. That's the other thing as well. You find what's effective and it works really well for about a week, and then it just dies and it stops working. So you've got to kind of, like you say, keep changing and moving. And then, I mean, I think one thing that has happened in a lot of other progressive movements in human rights and in environmental movements, and this is something that I've gone to a lot of their conferences as well, and one thing they talk about is that digital and organising have separated, and they're almost like, you know, they've got much bigger budgets and much bigger teams, but they say that their office is almost split, and they used to have conferences for the organisers, which is that face-to-face and stuff, and then there was conferences for the digital, and they didn't realise that actually if the two actually work together and learn from each other, that it will make both of them more effective.
Do you have anything to add to that, Alex?
Yeah, I just think that some of the outcomes that we come across will be counterintuitive to what we think and what we expect. So I think what follows from that is that the solutions may also be counterintuitive. So we just need to experiment and also meet people where they already are.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. How do you measure success, and how do you think about that? Do you have any metrics that you use, or how do you measure success and how do you improve? So, does anyone want to jump in? Or?
For me, I like that outsource this type of thing because I'm definitely not an expert. So I've tried to foster as many good working relationships with academics as I can. So when they have an opportunity to study something, they give us a tap on the shoulder and say, hey, have you got anything like this that we can have a look at? So they go and do the research for us and find out what we're not doing as well and what we can do better, whereas it would be a struggle for us to do that ourselves.
I find metrics a hard one as well, because I think that especially when you start to look at data, you can get lost in like impressions on Facebook, or you can get lost on click-throughs and all that sort of stuff, or even like petition signatures. And a lot of organisations, and it's a big trap that a lot of people fall into, is that, you know, we end up preaching to the converted and going, yay, we've got 20,000 signatures on our petition, and they're all animal people. So what have we actually done with that? So I think it's about developing a really strong strategy from the beginning and having an end goal, and then creating a whole, like, I mean, even if your strategy is, you know, veganism from 4% to 20% in this many years, and then breaking that down into smaller goals, and then trying to find a way to actually measure that. So how do you actually measure that behaviour change? And I mean, that could be then strategies like, you know, I've been meeting with Woolworths and some of their strategies, and they're talking about increasing all their plant-based options by 20%. And they also, you know, when you have your little Woolworths card and you click through, that tells us how many people are buying plant-based products. And so they're saying, well, you know, these people in this area used to buy predominantly this, and so now they're able to actually assess. So I don't know if you probably saw the controversy where they put the new plant-based meat in the meat section, and that actually came from research that showed that people who eat meat every week, they don't go to that section of the supermarket where the tofu and the mock meats are. And it's the same for me. I just don't go to the meat section. I just kind of like bypass it as if it's not there. So when they put the plant-based meat in, they could see that people who normally bought X amount of number of mints, you know, they might still buy a little bit of animal products, and then they'll buy that as well. And so they can see that the people that traditionally never bought mock meat have started to buy mock meat, and then they can see that other products are reducing. So you can sort of start to, you know, build those relationships with people like that, where you can kind of get metrics like that, and you can kind of play with some of that sort of stuff to try to understand what those sort of incremental goals are and how you're going to assess it. And I would always assess it with behaviour change, and making sure that that metric is something that, I mean, sometimes it has to be a compromise. Sometimes it's, I pledge not to do this anymore, or I pledge to, you know, no longer go, like, so you can actually find people, for example, on Facebook that are going to Thailand, and that are visiting places where they use elephants for riding. And then you can target those people very specifically and find them on Facebook and ask them to pledge not to ride an elephant while they're there, for example. And again, that might make a good metric as well. And then you can sort of talk to the tourism industries and say, you know, are you actually seeing a reduction in the number of people that are booking these elephant rides?
Yeah, it's interesting on the sort of public outreach sphere of things. It's sort of a almost too much or too little approach, in that admittedly probably the public outreach metrics is the biggest area and probably the most slippery and difficult area we can improve on. And we've often found through sort of experimentation and when we've thought of things and sort of the idea of pledges or even signing things up to things, signing people up to things, that we sometimes fear that we're going to, because you know we essentially are on the streets outreaching people. The only thing we're missing is an iPad and a lanyard, and we look like someone from Guide Dogs Australia trying to be one of the typical charity muggers. And so that's we've sort of been a little bit apprehensive to move towards more pledge-based, metric-based things for that reason, and it makes things a bit more difficult to ascertain. But I think we're slowly finding the right balance between how hard to go with people that we can still find tractable metrics but aren't necessarily pledges in the case of that.
What do you think are the biggest barriers to someone being vegan? And do you think it's possible that focusing on reducing those barriers can be an effective means of helping to create change? Or, for example, there's a large percentage of people seem to relapse when they go vegan, and how can we do something to maybe mitigate that?
Definitely. Barriers is a huge thing, and it's definitely something that you would never leave out of a strategy when you're developing any kind of campaign strategy. The biggest barriers to veganism are social support. And that can be everything from, you know, my whole family continue to eat this and we eat as a family, and I don't have any friends. Some of it is accessibility, and that has, you know, I've been a vegan for 19 years, and anybody that tells me it's hard to be vegan, I'm like, no, it's really not these days. And I think that that's probably one of the biggest reasons why we've seen such a big rise in veganism, is that those accessibility issues have really dropped. You know, I mean, if you can go to Hungry Jack's or Domino's and get vegan food, then, you know, you're set, you can go anywhere. And then some people have an idea that it's going to be more costly. I don't think that veganism has to be more cost, but I think some people perceive a higher cost in veganism. And then I think that there's some research that just came out of the UK recently that was talking about men having a barrier to veganism because it was seen as less manly. So there's kind of those social things that those social constructs that just need to be ripped down as well. So yeah, absolutely, we need to focus on how to change and get rid of those barriers. So to explain to people, and I guess the other one is health. Again, it's a perception, a perceived health benefit to eating animals. So my partner is a vegan bodybuilder, so he makes a big point when he goes to bodybuilding competitions that he's vegan because, you know, people assume that you've got to eat a lot of meat and just be on the chicken and broccoli diet to be able to be a successful, enormous bodybuilder, which you don't. So he's trying to sort of break down some of those perceptions as well.
Yeah, I think we know that a lot of these barriers are myths, but the people that are experiencing them are not myths. This is what I just like about it. So we need to keep that in mind, I think. And for me anyway, I think culture and community are two of the biggest barriers. So that's why building community around the health movement is such a key
yeah, it's I think I guess I'd like to separate it into sort of two parts that are barriers for vegans. One sort of the more ideological end of things, and one the practical end of things. And I sort of spoke to the practical end of things, which is sort of accessibility to vegan options, not only vegan options in supermarkets, but also this perception that, you know, if you're at a restaurant that's not vegan, all you can order is chips and lettuce, which is really not the case either. If you're a paying customer, if you just ask, they'll probably provide you something. But a lot of what we focus on in our public outreach is sort of ideological barriers. Does anyone, so in the sort of couple thousand conversations that I've had with people, does anyone want to guess what sort of the most common objection people tend to give on the street to veganism is? Have any ideas? Okay, so it's probably about 60 to 70% of the time, the idea that in Australia that animals are killed humanely, and that I find this is the biggest ideological barrier that allow people to sort of stay in their sort of dreamlike trance of supporting commercial animal abuse. And so what we find is that, you know, the more we can directly attack the most common ideological barriers, and the other ones are ones related to health, ones related to other forces like necessity, and then you have sort of the more nitty-gritty moral fallacies. But it's I often find that it's a lot of just a pervading assumption, particularly in Australia, that it's done well and it's done ethically, and there is such a thing as humane slaughter to start with. And so I find on the ideological aspect of things, looking at the nitty-gritty of people's core beliefs, that's usually a good place to start.
Do any of you have any success stories that you'd like to talk about? Anything recently that you think has gone particularly well in your space?
Well, let's sounds a little bit depressing, but just let us think. I'll speak to one. As in 2018, as I said, the sort of our outcome in regards to the public track in regards to our activism, but our volunteer base has exploded in 2018 for Anonymous for Voiceless. Probably something like we probably run about over 100 demonstrations this year, and we've just had such a growth in volunteers. So I'm tending to find that more vegans are, so we've sort of got two parts of things that we find in sort of as the years progress, we go to outreach someone on the street, and we're having more and more this sort of conundrum where they'll go, I'm vegan already, and the question is where do we go from there? And then now the outreach switches to, well, you're vegan, why don't you become active? And sort of what I'm finding is that, you know, it took me a year and a half of being vegan to become active, and now from what I can see in the really exploding amount of volunteers that we have, is that vegans are becoming active pretty fast these days. There's you know, activists who, you know, people in our group who will see Dominion and come join us the week or 2 weeks later, and so it's going from these sort of old guard of my line of things of a year and a half to, you know, months, which is really exciting, because you're going to have this sort of feedback mechanism where activism and advocacy creates more vegans, and vegans turn active quicker, and then it just hopefully lives back on itself.
Yeah, well, one of my passions anyway, since I first learned about it, is this toxin that we use to kill unwanted wildlife. It's called 1080. If you've heard about it, you know that it's absolutely terrible, and it's disgusting that we use it. Australia and New Zealand use almost 100% of the world's 1080. We lay it in baits, we drop it out of planes, international parks. We even insert it inside the animals, so once the capsule that it's in dissolves, the poison actually poisons them, and that can last anywhere from 12 to 48 hours of absolute agony. So that when I learned about that, and I've been vegan for a long time, I've never heard about 1080. So when I learned about that, I knew that this was something that really had to change. There was a possibility that we could change it. The rest of the world was already against it, basically. And anyway, maybe last year or the year before, a Queensland council actually inserted 1080 capsules into 2 wild dogs / dingoes. There was a bit of uproar about that, and so we kind of formed a coalition with, I think, up to close to 20 other Australian organisations to actually push for a ban on this stuff. And maybe a couple of 2 or 3 months ago, Darren Hinch introduced a ban on tanning. So that's something I find really positive. And it goes back to regulations.
Cool.
I can think of so many different positive and amazing things. We are the 4th fastest growing vegan country in the entire world. Veganism is growing really, really fast in Australia. I'm seeing more and more companies introducing vegan options. So I used to work for people for the ethical treatment of animals. So we were getting contacted by all these different organisations. How do, Domino's and Hungry Jack's, Sanchuros, how do we introduce vegan menus? How do we make sure that they're tasty? How do we get people in the door to eat these foods? But I've been involved in a lot of campaigns as well that have been very successful. So ASOS banned the sale of a lot of animal products quite recently. So ASOS is a big online store. So they banned the sale of mohair and a variety of other things. There's a lot of designers recently that have committed to ditching fur. One thing that the Animal Justice Party did, so we've got, as I mentioned, we've got one member of parliament that's been elected. And he is in a very difficult place at the moment because we've got a very conservative government. And everybody said that, he's one person, his vote's not needed. So one of the reasons why we want to encourage people to vote for the Animal Justice Party is, even if we only get one other member or even 2 other members in, people think, oh, well, you're still a small party, 3 people, 2 people won't be able to make a change. But, we've even been able to make a change with just 1 member, and if we had, if we end up with a hung parliament or a parliament where they need a couple of extra votes to be able to get their own issues passed, they would come to us in the same ways at the moment. They go to the shooters and fishers and the Christian Democrats, and that's why we see some really awful bills about shooting in national parks. But we've only got 1 member, but we ran a bill this year called the Right to Release Bill. This is a bill that I've been working on for a very long time. Our strategy was to ask, so essentially I used to work, I was on a panel called the Animal Research Review Panel, which is part of the Department of Primary Industries. So I went with the vet who would investigate every research animal in New South Wales. And so I would attend with him and see what was actually happening inside these facilities. And I started to actually manage to get some of these animals out of medical research. So we got guinea pigs, rats, mice, goats out of medical research, and I started to get them into homes. And one thing I noticed was that when people started to interact with these animals, they started to question medical research where they hadn't before. So these animals had faces and they had names. And so we thought if we could get a bill to make it mandatory that cats and dogs are released rather than killed at the end of medical research, especially if they were not in a position where they were going to be in pain and suffering for the rest of their life, then these animals would give a face and a name to every other species that's still going to be in medical research. So we put a bill up, and it really kind of put the government in a very difficult position because the research community was saying, no, if these animals get out, we will lose our social license to continue to test on animals because people will start to think about the fact that cats and dogs are being used in medical research. So they argued very heavily against it, and we said these are cats and dogs. We had the RSPCA on side saying we'll help rehome these animals. And in the end, we didn't get the bill passed, but we got a regulation through which will make it mandatory. That's about 1,000 animals that will come out. We've got 28 dogs coming out in about a week or 2. So these are dogs that have been in medical research. I've just got some pictures of these dogs the other day and nearly burst out into tears. The 3 girls that I've got images of, they're 10 years old. So they've been institutionalised for 10 years and they're just about to be released to actually go into homes and experience love. And obviously we will be able to get some images of these animals and to you know, I mean, the medical research industry is something that is so well hidden in this organisation. It's a complete blackout zone. Nobody knows even how many cats and dogs are used in medical research in New South Wales, and that was something that was argued about in Parliament when the bill went up. But you know, this is the beginning of actually starting to sort of deconstruct that and to actually see and to get more information there out to the public about what's happening with these animals.
Great, thanks. Some really inspiring stories there. We'll go to the audience quickly. If anyone wants to ask a question but doesn't have a phone, yes.
Yes, just following on from you referenced the use of 1080. I'm wondering if the panel is familiar with the restoration work that was done on Quarry Island about 6 or 7 years ago. Familiar with that at all? Okay. Three invasive species were targeted for removal, and they were removed within a 12-month period via heavy aerial baiting. I think Macquarie Island is the largest island in the world where mice, rats and rabbits were exterminated. And I don't know if it was 1080 that was used. My guess is that it probably would have been. But the results of removing those species was an enormous rebound of natural species there, not just animals, but plants as well. And there you've got a situation where you've got pluses and minuses, and I'm wondering, have you given thought to unusual cases like this?
I don't think it is unusual. I think this happened.
No, it's not unusual, but it,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think it's when we get to trading off one life against another, we get to a really, really dangerous area. I don't believe that any animal, regardless of label, should be killed, and not only killed in the most painful way possible. And going back to it being a native species, I struggle to understand why a so-called native species is worthy of more protection than your cat, who, if they did get lost, could go feral and then could get poisoned with 1080. The same animals that live with it. So I think there are a lot of arguments about, you know, we can do these things because they're native. They're protecting the native population against the invaders, any euphemism that you want to use. All these words effectively make us more inclined to accept horrible things. So just by calling an animal feral, you're basically opening up an avenue to do terrible things. Because what do you do with a feral? You control them, which is another euphemism for kill. And I don't believe that it's necessary.
Can I,
Sorry, we'll just get everyone else to respond to that if you have any other questions.
Yeah, no, I agree with Alex's position. I don't think there's bar further mass ecological ramifications. Don't really particularly see any moral difference between a native or a quote-unquote invasive species. We would all reject that in the human context quite vehemently. I don't see the difference as well. We do accept that in the animal context.
And it's like Alex has said as well, that you know, there's this whole thing of words, and they're so powerful to be able to kind of get us to disassociate from certain animals and associate to other animals, and they're so powerful that, you know, a companion animal like a cat or a dog, which, you know, traditionally as our culture we associate with so closely, can also then be so disassociated because it's a wild dog or it's a feral cat, and suddenly we're disassociating from certain animals. But at the end of the day, in our ability to feel pain and our ability to suffer, we are all equal. And I think that these guys have really kind of said that.
Yep, but they have to do that to save the environment.
I don't believe that they do. I don't believe that's accurate. No, because if you so-called wipe them out, which is an impossibility to begin with, there's a vacuum, they're going to come straight back. So if we're here to talk about effective ways of doing things, that's the most ineffective way that you can do it. By mass killing or attempting to mass kill with poisons, gases, anything that you like. It's so ineffective because we've been doing it for decades.
I saw that program about Macquarie Island, and they didn't because like the natural fauna came back, and like the natural animals came back because they got rid of the ferals, and it's not an ongoing thing. I mean, as much as I don't want to see animals suffer or be killed, but I mean, I think it's once they get rid of them, they're gone, and then the environment can rehabilitate itself, and then the natural animals can have a go themselves, because that was the problem with that.
I think this is an area where there's might be a difference in values disagreement, because some people value the environment intrinsically, and some people don't value the environment intrinsically. What matters is the individuals in the environment that are suffering or not suffering or experiencing well-being, rather than protecting the environment per se. So just, I think, keep that in mind, because I think it might be a bit of values disagreement. But does anyone want to respond to that?
I think one other thing as well to think about, and thank you for making that clarification. If we were to take the value argument out of it and to just look at it, I haven't seen that program that you guys are talking about, so I'm only speaking from what you guys have said. But from a completely scientific point of view, you're talking about one island, one small opportunity where something happened. But if you were to get 1080 and spray it all over Australia, you're going to be killing every companion animal, every wild animal. It's going to get in the waterways, it's going to kill people. If you got 1080 in the waterways here, it would kill every single person. In America, it's considered a weapon of mass destruction if you own 1080 poison, because there is no antidote. If your child or anyone picks it up and absorbs it through the skin, they're gone. There's absolutely nothing that anyone can do. And so, I mean, this is a hideous poison, as Alex said, that not only causes, suffering across these species, but there is a lot of research that sort of says, okay, if there are animals, and let's remember that introduce animals into an environment, again, is a human-caused problem. They haven't, they've only been put into environments where they're unnatural in that environment because we pick them up and put them there for our own reasons. But for example, where animals have bred, let's say cats, colony cats, where people have gone out and dissected them and then re-released them, they haven't then bred and continued their numbers. And there's a lot of research that's going into this whole trap, neuter, release as an alternative. And there's different programs that are looking at dropping contraceptives into wild animals to stop their breeding cycles as well, in a similar way to the trap, neuter, release cycle. And these are more humane alternatives to using something like a hideous poison that is a danger as well to the native animals. And we know that there was research all along the northern beaches with 1080 poison. And when I was trying to convince the council there to stop using the 1080 poison, their own research found that the native quolls that they were trying to protect were consuming more 1080 than the foxes. So they were actually destroying the native quolls in that area rather than protecting them. So, it's very problematic.
Did anyone else have anything to add to that?
I agree with that one.
Yeah. Okay. Get one more question from a lot of questions on here. Sorry if anyone else. Hopefully the speakers will be around and ask me more questions after that. So what do you think are some of the most important skills that someone might acquire or have to, I guess this can vary a lot for different people, but to do the work that you do or to do any work for animals, what things do you think people should learn to be effective animals?
Patience.
Yep.
I think that there's a variety of roles. Animal charities are always looking for fundraisers, so getting any kind of qualification in fundraising. Everyone always needs accounting. There doesn't seem to be any kind of pro-animal accountants out there. So get a bookkeeping or accountant's degree if you want to work in animal rights, and I guarantee you a position. The Animal Justice Party is growing and growing, so if you get some kind of political degree, law degree, law for animals is also a booming area because of groups like Voiceless. Psychology for campaigning and behaviour change is an important one. And then things like graphic artists, like sort of, and social media type skills is a really big area as well, which a lot of charities are hiring people in, and communications. So media work, and then obviously communications degrees and stuff like that from universities, I think are all really useful. If you've already got a degree and you're looking at expanding your knowledge, both Alex and I have done a 6-month course with the Australian Progress, which is a group that trains up progress leaders essentially on campaigning. So they cover political lobbying, fundraising, social media, campaign strategy, and all of that sort of stuff. So a lot of the people are doing human rights and environment stuff, but there are a few of us, Alex, myself, and Jesse Marks from Animals Australia, that have also done that course. It's like a 6-month internship, which you do sort of part-time along with work. But I think that's a really great way to upskill as well.
Yeah, I think this is the beauty of advocacy. Pretty much any occupation, you can have somewhat of an effect in there. Just only limit by the amount of creativity that you have. I guess I also see a really large potential going in the future for social media and the design aspect of things. And I guess I'd also say what I see a lot of promise in is just the sort of varying sort of concentric circles of activists that I find in our own community. Some who are able to come to one event per month, some who come to multiple events per week, and as much as our pretty much broader volunteer base is made of people who attend maybe once or twice a month, I find having a few of them extremely dedicated people who have taken their entire life and sort of geared it and turned the dials in a way to orientate it completely towards animal advocacy, whether that's on the ground activism or policy change, I find could be worth 10, 20, 30 of those sort of peripheral volunteers. And so I guess if I was to recommend anything, it would be look at how you can tweak things in your life to orientate having more time or more funds in regards to an effective altruism approach, but more time to dedicate, because I think a lot of us, we see the gravity of the situation, we have the passion there, but a lot of us are simply constrained by full-time work or a mortgage or children or anything of that nature. I'm not saying disown your children or go broke in your mortgage, but there's definitely resources you can look at, particularly in the sort of emerging sort of self-help, self-improvement sphere of things that will help you orientate your life to have a lot more space to dedicate to this cause.
Great. Thanks so much to our speakers for sharing their time with us and imparting some of their knowledge. They've all got a lot of experience, and hopefully if they're sticking around, you can ask them any more questions that you might have. So can we please thank our speakers? Just in conclusion, I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping. I also want to talk about some resources that I think are really useful for not just for animal advocacy, but from an effective altruist kind of combination, effective animal advocacy perspective. One is one of my favourite books, Animal Liberation by Peter Singer, which I think is one of the great introductions to this whole area. It was written several decades ago, but I think he's done an updated version since then. 2 books on effective altruism that are good if you're more interested in that are The Most Good You Can Do and Doing Good Better, both kind of give a good overview of effective altruism in general. Animal charity evaluators do research on the effectiveness of different interventions and charities, and have a lot of information on their website. 80,000 Hours focuses on careers. 80,000 hours get their name from the average person spends 80,000 hours working on their career over their life. And so what can you do to make those hours as effective as possible? So they have information about how to choose a career, but also about how to get careers, how to get jobs, and information like that.
And animal ethics do a lot of research around kind of all this space as well. And effectivealtruism.org is the website for Effective Altruism. That's about it. I'd just like to invite Neil to give a bit of a spiel on the next event. So hopefully, if you enjoyed tonight or you want to stay involved, then you can come to that. So
Thanks, Michael. My name is Neil Farrow. We're part of the Effective Altruism community in Sydney for about a year, and our next event is at News is Anything, so Great Vegan Meal, 22nd of November, Thursday. We're going to discuss opportunities to get more involved with the AA Sydney. We'll have actual job roles coming up and discussing future events and how to grow the movement some more. So feel free to come along, check out the Facebook site, join Sydney, Effective Altruism Sydney, the Facebook site, or meet up for more details. Also like to thank Michael for hosting such a great event. If you give another as well for helping us organise this space. It's awesome space here. So I think thank you one more time.
and thanks, Neil.
Yeah.